Greetings. My name is Dr. Gianina Pellegrini. I am an adjunct faculty member at Saybrook University and program manager at Partnerships for Trauma Recovery, a small nonprofit providing psychosocial support to refugees and asylum seekers living in the San Francisco Bay Area of the United States. I will be speaking about women's experiences of intimate partner violence by their male partners during displacement due to armed conflict. I will review the risk factors and triggers associated with an increase in intimate partner violence during displacement, and offer some suggestions for humanitarian organizations to consider when working to reduce violence against women during conflict and displacement. Violence against women is a public health concern that transcends ethnicity, culture, religion, and geography. Nearly 1 in 3 women worldwide have reported physical and/or sexual abuse in their lifetime. It is well documented that violence against women increases during armed conflict, as women are often subjected to violence by armed forces as a strategic method to terrorize and control communities. Although much of the literature focuses on violence perpetrated by armed actors, there is also significant evidence to suggest that there is a direct relationship between the escalation of conflict and the escalation of intimate partner violence perpetrated against women by male partners. This is especially true in displacement, such as in refugee or internally displaced persons camps. Several studies suggest that rates of intimate partner violence during conflict are higher than most of the rates of wartime rape and sexual violence perpetrated by individuals outside of the home. Yet this does not get as much attention. And I propose that addressing the risk factors of intimate partner violence should be more appropriately integrated into humanitarian programming within camp settings. Armed conflict disrupts all aspects of life for individuals, families, and entire communities. When people are forced to flee their homes due to the violence and instability caused by armed conflicts, the long-established cultural, social, and economic networks are broken, resulting in a deep sense of loss. People lose their homes, land ownership, material goods, financial security, household income, and social relationships. Armed conflicts destroy all sense of safety and well-being. Displacement often results in families being separated, which breaks down the social structures that provided security, order, and a sense of belonging within a community. Being forced to relocate due to violence can be very distressing and isolating. And then this stress is compounded by the challenges to living in a refugee camp and internally displaced persons camp. Displacement offers new challenges, such as obtaining a sufficient food and water supply, finding and sustaining adequate employment, and financial stability. There is a struggle to obtain essentials like clothing and supplemental food rations. During displacement, people are forced to build new social networks and redevelop a sense of safety and physical and mental well-being. In stable, non-warring societies, women are at risk of intimate partner violence by male partners due, at least in part, to the social structures that condone violence against women and gender inequality. The intense stressors of war and displacement exacerbate the gender inequalities that already exist in stable societies. And inevitably, these stressors often trigger an increase in the frequency and severity of intimate partner violence, and they perpetrate ongoing violence against women. Types of intimate partner violence during displacement range just as they would in stable settings. Women in displacement report physical, emotional, and sexual abuse perpetrated by their male partners. Some of the risk factors that predict intimate partner violence in stable settings are similarly found to be risk factors during times of conflict and during displacement. Risk factors such as economic stress, excessive drinking and/or substance use, changes to social status, and adjusting gender social roles all contribute to the likelihood of women experiencing intimate partner violence from their male partners. Daily stressors that are most commonly linked to intimate partner violence increase exponentially during armed conflict and displacement. And when these commonly recognized risk factors are combined with the risk factors prevalent during displacement, such as being separated from family and social support, women are at an even greater risk of experiencing violence from their male partners. As in stable settings, economic stress during displacement is a strong predictor of intimate partner violence. During displacement, it is difficult to obtain sustained employment and sufficient financial resources. Refugees and other displaced individuals are often subjected to daily rations of food and water, and without suitable employment, people are unable to acquire the financial resources necessary to supplement daily rations. And just as in stable settings, confrontations and arguments related to financial security commonly lead to intimate partner violence during displacement. The literature on intimate partner violence in stable settings indicate a distinct relationship between use of alcohol and other drugs and the frequency and severity of intimate partner violence. The literature on living in encampment, either in a refugee camp or internally displaced persons camp, also indicate that the stressors related to displacement negatively affect the patterns and norms of using substances. Therefore, it is a logical conclusion that as these stressors alter substance use patterns, there will be a direct relationship to the increase in the frequency and severity of intimate partner violence. Even when drinking and substance use were not common practice prior to displacement, several studies in refugee camps illustrate that displacement alters patterns of drinking and using. Drug and alcohol use may become acceptable in camp settings due to the emergence of social norms. Substance use is identified as a coping mechanism within camp settings as people, most often unemployed men, try to adjust to the stressors of displacement. Research in camp settings has found that unemployed men who increase their use of substances often begin to neglect household responsibilities, disengage with their families, and sometimes spend limited resources on their drinking or substance use habit, furthering conflict over financial spending and economic insecurity. Men's excessive use of substances also contributes to their female partner's disapproval, initiating further tensions in a relationship that then become triggers for physical and verbal abuse. Sociocultural norms are also affected by the conditions of displacement. One known trigger to intimate partner violence in stable settings that is exponentially more apparent in camp settings is changes to social status or social roles. In stable settings, it is known that when traditional gender roles are altered due to loss of employment, and women begin to take on tasks that were traditionally completed by their male partners, the frequency and severity of intimate partner violence perpetrated against women by male partners increases. In camp settings, these shifts in social roles and social status can be even more extreme, particularly among families where partners adhere to traditional gender roles, whereby the man holds more power and typically is the provider of the family, and the woman is expected to be submissive to the husband's decisions and actions. During displacement, gender roles quickly dissipate as the need for survival by any means necessary takes hold. In camps, women often are required to take on responsibilities that were traditionally male tasks, such as providing for the family, and this creates a dramatic shift in gender identity. Women interviewed in camps indicate that the circumstances of the camp require that they take a stronger role in providing for their families and managing the rations provided to them by humanitarian organizations. Doing this, the women indicate, took control and power away from their male partners, and they felt this triggered men's emotional and physical violence against them. Women report that the failure of either party to meet traditional gendered responsibilities leads to confrontations and culminate in men's perpetration of violence. The other factor that influences the rise of intimate partner violence in camps is the lack of family and social support. Women's vulnerability to violence increases as social networks break down. In stable settings, there is a strong indication that social support plays a protective role in reducing women's risk of intimate partner violence. Social networks provide women with support, reassurance, confidence, protection, and options to retreat from violent relationships. In some cases, family and friends also help to mitigate conflict by intervening, mediating conversations to resolve conflict, or offering alternative living arrangements. Armed conflict and displacement rupture critical social networks and relationships, which drastically reduces options for women who may be at risk of experiencing harm. Family and trusted community members are often separated in displacement, resulting in many women feeling isolated because they no longer have family or friends to go to for support. The friends and family members who once offered support, advice, or sanctuary are no longer available, which increases the need for support from new neighbors in camp settings. In some studies, women report that they couldn't rely on their new neighbors and people within their community for help when they experienced intimate partner violence. One study with Syrian women living in a refugee camp found that women who experienced intimate partner violence perpetrated by their male partners were less likely to leave their relationship because they did not feel they had a strong enough social network to separate from their partner. Women experiencing domestic violence said that they felt dependent on their abusive partner because they did not have any other family or friends to rely on. The inability to separate from an abusive partner compounded their feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness. What all of this research illustrates is that violence against women prevention programs in conflict settings must not only address violence perpetrated against women by armed actors, but must also include an emphasis on intimate partner violence. Addressing the risk factors of intimate partner violence must be more appropriately integrated into humanitarian programming within camp settings. Humanitarian organizations with a focus of reducing violence against women in camp settings must consider women's experiences of intimate partner violence by their male partners. Research in camps clearly illustrate that women are just as likely, if not more likely, to experience violence at the hands of their male partners than they are from some outside source. It is common for humanitarian aid organizations in camp settings to focus attention on developing and/or supporting women's empowerment programs, with the expressed intention of providing opportunities for women to become more self-sufficient and independent. Examples include providing women with skills training and educational opportunities, some of which may not have been available prior to displacement. While many women express gratitude for these opportunities, there may be an unintended consequence that actually increases the likelihood of displaced women being subjected to harm by their male partners. At least one study has found that men report feeling disempowered and frustrated by the many opportunities in camps that focus exclusively on women. Some men report feeling like their traditional role of protecting and providing for their families was being taken over by the international humanitarian organizations, and this contributed to feelings like they were losing their identity within their intimate relationships. Additionally, men reported that their cultural and traditional values around gender roles was being compromised by the humanitarian organization's efforts to emphasize supporting women's programming that increase their self-sufficiency. According to these male respondents, the humanitarian programs threatened their place in the family, which inadvertently triggered men to perpetrate violence against their female partners. Although it is likely the intention of humanitarian organizations focused on building women's empowerment programs to help advance the rights of women and therefore mitigate violence against women, it is actually quite possible that neglecting to understand cultural values and traditions as they pertain to gender identity and gender roles may be unintentionally increasing women's vulnerability to experiencing harm at the hands of their male partners. It is therefore imperative that humanitarian efforts within camps approach social aid with a culturally appropriate framework that truly mitigates the risk factors and triggers associated with intimate partner violence. The majority of programming within camps does not adequately address gendered communities and societal forces that contribute to intimate partner violence. One study found that incorporating discussion groups addressing traditional gender norms for male-female couples within a women's savings program actually decrease intimate partner violence. It is insufficient to develop programming to support and empower women's financial resources or self-sufficiency without simultaneously addressing the gender inequalities that exist prior to displacement. Programming within camps must work to transform gender dynamics and social norms while assisting men and women with redefining their contributions to the family. By redefining gender roles, men and women will feel less threatened and triggered when they have to take on new responsibilities that fall outside of traditional cultural gender roles. Increasing viable income-generating opportunities for women and men in camps will decrease the risk factors associated with intimate partner violence. It is also essential that programming in camps create opportunities for women to rebuild trusted social networks, safe spaces, and improve community responses and options for women to seek safety and redress when intimate partner violence occurs. While it is true that violence perpetrated against women by armed actors is one component of gender-based violence in crisis settings, these settings actually increase the likelihood of women experiencing intimate partner violence by their male partners. Therefore, advocacy and programming efforts must refocus their attention on strengthening processes and accountability mechanisms that relate to intimate partner violence at the policy and legal levels. With all of that said, it's essential to not lose sight that intimate partner violence exists prior to a humanitarian crisis, and that it persists and potentially increases during conflict and displacement. Violence against women generally, and specifically intimate partner violence, takes place against a backdrop of structural gender-based discrimination that exists in nearly all societies globally. While efforts must be made during conflict and displacement to mitigate violence against women, it is equally important that efforts to foster equality and gender-responsive policies in stable societies be supported. Violence against women does increase during conflict and displacement, but violence against women during conflict exists in a world of structural gender-based discrimination that put women at risk of experiencing violence simply because of their gender. We will not eradicate violence against women until we are able to break down the structures that perpetuate gender-based discrimination. Thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective at this conference. I look forward to further dialogue through the online forum.